for the real treat, I always give a little challenge, and then I talk about the real treat. And the real treat is your speaker today, a very good friend of mine, Karen Hughes. She was born in Paris, France. She was an army brat, as she likes to say, and her dad was the last governor of the U.S. Panama Canal Zone. He was appointed by President Ford before the Panama Canal was turned over. She graduated from high school at W.T. White in Dallas, and graduated from SMU and worked as a TV reporter. And despite that, we're still good friends. And that she is an excellent person, a person of strong character. President Bush, she worked for President Bush when he was Governor Bush, and was his closest advisor. The Dallas Morning News described her in an editorial as the most powerful woman ever to serve in the White House. ABC said that she was the most essential advisor to the president. She was in charge of overseeing the press secretary, the media affairs, speech writing, and communications, and they never made a major decision without Karen Hughes being in the room. She has also served as Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy with the rank of ambassador. And she did that with dignity and great service, was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in 2005. At this time, she's Vice Chairman of Public Relations Company that's worldwide, Burson-Marsteller. Give a good West Texas welcome to my friend, Ambassador Karen Hughes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, you did great. Well, thank you so much, Chancellor Hanson, President Bailey, members of the Board of Regents, distinguished faculty and guests. I'm honored to be here with you, and I know you graduates want to join me in thanking the people up there who made so many sacrifices to get you to this day. Join me in a round of applause for your parents. We also thank the faculty who taught and mentored and inspired and occasionally had to prod you along your way. And of course, heartiest congratulations of all to each of you, members of the class of 2009. I think I know a little bit about the emotion and the excitement that all of you must be feeling today, because my son will be graduating 2 weeks from today from another of our great Texas university, the one whose national championship hopes you all dashed right here at Jones Stadium last fall. Now, for many of you graduates, this day probably couldn't come fast enough. Others of you might have managed to stretch 4 years into 5 or 6, a little more time at Chimmy's. And you've learned so much during your time here, great life lessons such as how to walk to class at a 45-degree angle against 50-mile-an-hour winds. And here you are, ready to take on the world with both guns blazing. Now, I know the only thing standing between you and your diploma is my speech, so I'm going to take some advice I heard from a West Point officer earlier this week. He said, be brief, be brilliant, be gone. Now, I'm not sure about the brilliant part, but I think I can manage the other two. I'm going to talk today about two things, just two things. Two things that I hope you will follow and be guided by in the years ahead, and those are passion and perspective. Now, I have to tell you, graduates, when I was sitting in your chair, the day I graduated from college, I never would have dreamed that I would one day work at the White House. During my years in college, I fell in love with journalism and the art of writing and television news writing, and so I started my career, as the Chancellor said, as a television reporter. I covered everything from West Texas tornadoes to the Texas legislature, and it was sometimes hard to tell the difference between the two. As a reporter, though, I fell in love with politics, and I realized the profound impact that the decisions being made in the political process had on people's lives. And I wanted to get involved in all that, and so eventually I worked on a series of campaigns. My husband called those my will consult for food years, but eventually I went to work for a guy named George. And boy, what does it seem like a long time ago that any of us ever called him that. He says it was back when the motorcade was one car, and I remind people he was sometimes the one driving the car. Our political journey took him to the Texas governor's office and later the White House, and this has all been such an incredible experience that I think you can imagine. I've had a number of what I call pinch me moments when I quite literally have to almost pinch myself to believe that this has all happened to me. I remember the very first time I heard the Marine Band play Hail to the Chief, and the ruffles and flourishes sounded, and the president bounded up on stage, and I remember thinking, that's the president, and I know him, and he knows me, and we've had dinner together, and I know how he takes his coffee, and he knows that I am tall, not big, because we have had that conversation. Now, I tell you all that because at my college graduation, I never could have planned my career. Although I always had to earn a living, I never took a job just because of money. In fact, a couple of times I took pay cuts along the way to do things that I was passionate about. And because I moved so many times, I have never yet fully vested in a retirement plan at any place I have ever worked. Now, your financial advisor will not recommend that, but I wouldn't trade it. And I share it to give you my first piece of advice, and that is follow your passions in keeping with your priorities. You're graduating at a challenging time. It's a tough economy out there. I see some nodding heads. Many of you may have looked for jobs and had trouble finding one. It might be a good time to take a risk. Do something that you're passionate about. Go to Africa and work in an AIDS clinic. It doesn't cost much to live there, and you'll do a world of good. Go overseas and teach English so young people across the world can meet an exciting and inspiring young American. Become a community organizer. That worked out pretty well for someone else we all know. Don't feel you have to have a plan now. Follow your passions in keeping with your priorities. I also hope you'll remember that your job is important and you'll spend a lot of hours at it, but it's a part of who you are. It's what you do. It is not who you are. It's somewhat ironic that I'm perhaps best known not for any job I had, but for my decision to leave one. To leave what many view as the pinnacle of power at the White House and come home to Texas, because I'm also passionate about my role as a wife and mother. I hope that my life says that you can have a career and a family and meet your responsibilities to both. You'll have to make choices along the way, but you don't have to choose one or the other. That doesn't mean it's easy, it's frequently not, or that I'm especially good at it. A couple of years ago, I headlined a charity event, and they sent out an invitation, and they called it an evening with Karen Hughes, and my husband picked it up and looked at it and said, I'd like an evening with Karen Hughes. We all face demands on our time in a tug of war to be faithful in our different roles as parents, as children, as spouses, as employers or employees. Life is a series of conflicting demands, and we make choices. And I think the biggest challenge is to make sure that our choices are based on our true priorities. We all have to decide what's true and lasting and most important, and use that to ground our decisions. St. Augustine used a beautiful phrase, ordo amorum, the order of the loves. The most important thing we all do in life is choose our loves and order them very, very carefully. We frequently act and work as if fame or power or money or all the stuff we collect are our true loves. Yet I think most of us, if we take time to step back from that list of things that keep us busy and focus on what's truly important, most of us would say our faith, our family, the people around us that we love. People still ask me why I really left the White House back in 2002. I was in a dressing room the other day, and a lady said, honey, tell me, why'd you really do it? Well, the simple fact was my husband and I decided to reorder our loves. Working in the White House was conflicting in some very basic ways with my priorities as a wife and mother, with having time to spend with my son, with having him grow up in the place where I thought he would best succeed and thrive. And I felt empowered to make the decision to leave because I knew family was a priority for my boss as well. Ever since I'd gone to work for him, President Bush had said, if you're a mom or a dad, that's your single most important responsibility in life. And that brings me to my second piece of advice. Choose your bosses and your associates very carefully. Seek friends and employers who share your core values, that reinforce rather than undermine your own priorities, who set a good example and encourage you to be your best. I remember once President Bush had invented one of his words. He's quite creative that way. I joke that his brain faster works than his mouth does when that happens. And the same morning he had called the terrorists folks. It fell to me to go in and say, Mr. President, these are trained killers. I don't think you ought to be calling them folks. There are a lot of bad folks in the world, he told me. I said, I know, but it's just wrong. It just sounds too folksy. And so he sort of grumbled, anybody else not like anything I have to say today? Later that day, he gave a speech, and afterwards he came off the stage and he said, well, did I say anything wrong this time? And I really didn't want to answer because it had been a great speech, but I promised that I'd always give him my honest, unvarnished opinion. And so I had to say, well, yes, sir, you said misunderestimate. I did not, he said. And our chief of staff was standing there and he helpfully nodded and said, yes, sir, Mr. President, 3 times. The president says, you know, a guy goes out, pours his heart out, gives a great speech, and all they can talk about is 3 words. Nobody ever has anything nice to say. But later that day, we were flying home on Air Force One, and I hear this rustling behind me, and all of a sudden a pair of hands land on my shoulders, and I look up, and it's the President of the United States, and he proudly announces, I'm going to misunderestimate folks. And then under his breath, he leaned down and he said, I want you to always, always tell me whenever I screw up. He had detected that hesitation, and the president had a healthy perspective. He may have been the most powerful man in the world, but he knew he needed, and he made sure that we knew he wanted and valued our honest opinions. People often ask me how I managed to maintain perspective in the rather heady world of Washington, where people seat you by order of rank and they call you the honorable or ambassador or all these fancy titles. And I have a favorite story about that. It's a classic political power play. But this one is not chronicled in the New York Times or Newsweek. This one is found in the New Testament in Matthew 20. The mother of 2 of Jesus' 12 disciples essentially pulls an end run. She goes behind the back of all the other disciples and goes to Jesus with just a little request that her 2 sons might sit at his left and right if he ever gets this kingdom he keeps talking about. Now, I love that story because, first of all, it's a mom. And how typical of a mom. She obviously thinks it's important because she bothers to ask, but she's not asking for herself. She's asking for her children. She wants the best seats in the house for her boys for eternity. But it's really not the question, of course, but the answer that's the important part of that story. And Jesus does not tell her yes or no. He tells her you've got the wrong perspective. You're looking at it all wrong. That's not the way to look at things, that whoever wishes to be great among you must be a servant. Now, I found in that story a lesson for how to approach my high-powered jobs, to remind myself that every day in the midst of those titles and those meetings with presidents and prime ministers, that I was there to serve the president, to serve my fellow citizens, and always to try to serve in keeping with my faith. One way you graduates can keep your perspective in the months and years ahead, call home. Now, it will come as no surprise to you that your parents aren't always right. As my son gets a little older, we're learning that I'm frequently not nearly as right as I think I am, but he's learning I'm also a little wiser than he sometimes thought I was. It won't undermine your independence to keep close connections. Your parents love you, and they want what's best for you, and they can provide valuable perspective if you'll just allow them to. This university has enlarged your perspective, and I hope through the years ahead you will broaden it even further. Go to graduate school, become a student of the world, travel, learn another language. You are entering a global economy with more competition and more opportunities than ever. During my time at the White House, I traveled to more than 50 countries. Mostly, it was a tremendous experience in broadening my own perspective, a great learning experience for me at age 50. I studied the histories of the countries. I asked people about their lives. I tried to visit local cultural and historical sites to learn and to show respect. And I found that little things can sometimes say a lot and communicate in big ways. On my first trip to Egypt, I bought this necklace. You probably can't see it from out there, but it has an Arabic inscription on it. And it's a phrase that speaks of sincerity and trust and friendship. I told my husband I wasn't just buying beautiful jewelry around the world, I was engaging in cultural outreach. But I can't tell you how much it meant and how many people reacted positively to it. I remember landing in Bahrain, and I was greeted by an official from the foreign ministry. And he didn't say anything as I landed, but the next day, after I'd gotten to know him a little bit, he said, "You can't imagine what it means to see an American government official get off that airplane with Arabic on her necklace." I was at the White House for a State of the Union reception, and I saw a young Iraqi soldier who was there as a guest of Laura Bush, and he spotted me from across the room and grabbed the translator and came over and said, your necklace, it has Arabic. I never dreamed I would see Arabic at the White House. Small gestures of respect can make a big impact. My final piece of advice, the best way to gain perspective is to serve a cause or a calling or a commission that is bigger than yourself. Find something you really care about or start it and get involved. There's a great story from ancient Greece told by Pericles, who was himself known as a great speaker, and he paid perhaps the ultimate compliment to another speaker, Demosthenes. He said, "When Pericles speaks, the people say how well he speaks. But when Demosthenes speaks, the people say, 'Let us march.'" That's the kind of person we all want to follow. Someone who sees a cause that's so much bigger, so much grander, so much more noble. Someone whose passion seeks to involve all of us in their larger perspective. Congratulations, class of 2009. Follow your passion, expand your perspective, get out there and make us proud, and get your guns up. Thank you, and God bless you all.
I think there's no doubt why she was chosen as President Bush's communications director. What a marvelous speech. And what good advice to you. Choose your bosses well, order your loves. Thank you so much, Ambassador Hughes.